I'm excited for our fourth and final workshop. Thank you all for being here. It's exciting. It's an exciting moment, but also a sad moment. I hope you all sign up again. We're going to have new speakers. You're going to be matched with a new mentor. We're going to have new content. I think you're going to really enjoy it. But our workshop 4 topic is how to manage conflict in the workplace. This is a very big deal. And I think to maybe ask an early question, just to get the ball rolling on this topic, is when you're in a work environment, the question I have for you is, how do you want others to feel about you? Write in the comment section. I love to learn about it, because what's so critical is the intentionality that we have about how others feel about us. I think so often when we're in a stressful work environment, we think about blaming other people. We think, well, XYZ person wants to sabotage me. They're always trying to undercut me or undermine my work, or they just do these things just to frustrate me. But more often than not, I find that they don't do it on purpose. More often than not, I find that they don't even know that what they're doing is frustrating you. And so what I really want to open up for in terms of this conversation, this question, is how do you want other people to feel about you? Because there might be something that you do that frustrates somebody else. You don't even realize that that's what you're doing, because you maybe haven't set an intentionality. It just was the most convenient for you to do thing for you to do at the time, so you just kept on doing it. You had no idea that this frustrated other people. So write in the comment section, how do you want other people to feel about you at work? Do you want other people to think of you as reliable or dependable or hardworking or kind, friendly, always optimistic, nice, always having a good, positive, upbeat personality? How do you want other people to perceive you? I'd love to learn about that, because ultimately, this is your reputation. This is how other people perceive you. And this is so critical, because I think it's so often, it's so easy to blame others for the things that they do that frustrate us, but it's so easy to be blind to how what we could do might frustrate them. So if we can set an intention for how we want other people to feel about us, if we think about that every single morning when we go into work, our likelihood of actually fulfilling and embodying that persona, that person, increases substantially. So I want to ask the question, how do you want other people to feel about you at work? Now, this is critical, because ultimately this means that you're going to have to remove any other personal baggage to make sure that you're still staying consistent with how you want other people to feel about you. It doesn't matter if you found out your grandma just got diagnosed with cancer, or that your dog just died, or that you're having rough things that are going on in your relationship. Does not matter, because at the end of the day, what matters is, are you able to stay consistent to who you said you wanted to be? And the person that is the most professional, the person that is really bringing it every single time, is the person that can stay the most consistent. Because if you start to let your personal stuff creep into your professional life, it's going to open you up to potentially not being the consistent person, the consistent intentionality that you've set for how you want other people to feel about you. And I think it's really important that you really work towards doing that, which leads to the 3 keys to success that I've shared with you in every workshop, which is your strategy, your story, and your state. And fortunately, we know how to get ourselves into a state conducive for being successful. No matter what is going on in our words, no matter how mad, sad, angry, dejected we're feeling about anything going on, we can get ourselves into an emotional state conducive for being happy, even if it's for a temporary period of time, through our motion. So what I want to do right now is I want you all to stand up, and I want you to shimmy it out. I want you to shake it loose. I want you to scream at the top of your lungs. On the count of 3, scream. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out. Let it loose. Let it go. You've got nothing to lose. Who cares if other people are looking at you? You're probably in your house anyways. With all the coronavirus craziness going on, you're probably in quarantine. This is the time to let loose. Because here's the thing, what we know is that when you are able to do that, you're getting your blood moving, you're getting your blood flowing, your brain, you're releasing endorphins in your mind, you're getting yourself into a state conducive for being successful. So by doing that, you are putting yourself you are taking yourself from wherever you were, and you're putting yourself into a much more elevated status. That is how you stay consistent. No matter what you want other people to feel about you, if you can get yourself physically into a state conducive for being successful, other people are going to perceive you as whatever feeling you want to set for yourself. So that's critical. The other key is your story. What is the story you tell yourself for why you will or will not be successful? This is critical. If you tell yourself, well, I can't do that, or this is impossible, or I don't know if I have the abilities to do something like that, you're going to achieve the outcome that you've set for yourself. And that is ultimately going to lead to the outcomes that you put on yourself. So if you tell yourself why you're going to be successful, if you tell yourself why you're going to make it work, you might have a chance of actually going out and achieving the outcomes that you want to achieve. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things that you can do on a daily basis to get yourself there? So maybe if you think to yourself, how do I want other people to feel about me? Maybe if it's to be kind. What can you do that's really kind on a daily basis to really reinforce that feeling you want other people to feel about you? If you want other people to feel that you are hardworking or confident or reliable, what can you do on a daily basis that will embody, that will reinforce you being kind, hardworking, or confident, or reliable? What are those things that you can do to set yourself up for success? That is your strategy. Those are the things that you can do on a regular basis. Now, the reason why this all relates to conflict management in the workplace is because these intentions about how we want other people to feel about us is critical to what we actually manifest at work. Now, it's so easy to get into a rut. It's easy to get frustrated. It's easy for other people, for us to blame other people for our problems. But here is a great way. This workshop on conflict management is a great tool for you to leverage to help you overcome a lot of the issues that you've got and that you've essentially had for yourself at work. One of the biggest things that I'm a big believer, I'm a huge proponent of, is this concept called this concept called observation, feeling, need, request. This is the key to nonviolent communication, which you might think, I'm not getting violent in the workplace. That's okay. But what I've observed is that this is one of the best ways to totally diffuse a situation. Whether somebody gives you a snide comment at work that you just didn't appreciate, or somebody made an action that you felt like just didn't respect you, or your time, or your abilities, or that overall just frustrates you. As opposed to getting pissed off, yelling at them, exploding at them, being passive aggressive and talking shit about them behind their back, or anything that does not target the issue head on, any of those actions are not productive. Observation, feeling, need, request is productive and can help you come to a solution. Now, here's how observation, feeling, need, request works. It literally follows the exact formula that I've laid out. Observation. What is the thing that you have observed? Now, the key with observation is that it's got to be undeniable. It happened, but there's no emotion to it. So, for example, the thing that really frustrates you is when John interrupts you at work, and let's say he just interrupted you 3 times in the course of a conversation. You can say, hey, John, I was hoping that we could chat for a minute. John says, yeah, sure, what's going on? You say, hey, so one thing that I observed is that in the course of this conversation, you interrupted me 3 times. Now, you don't say, you were being a jerk, you were being a dick, you interrupted me and really threw me off. Like no feelings tied to it, just you interrupted me 3 times. I started talking about this, and then you cut me off and started talking about that. I started talking about this, you cut me off, started talking about that, and then I started talking about this, and you cut me off and started talking about that. It's the key is that it's undeniable. It happened. It's something that John can say, you know what? You're right, I did interrupt you 3 times. Now, doesn't matter what his excuses were for interrupting you. The next part is the feeling. Now, the feeling is, how do you actually feel about that? You're not here to call out John and call him out for being a jerk. You're here to say, hey, when I am interrupted, I feel belittled. I feel disrespected. And now this is the big part, your need. Now, don't elaborate, by the way, when I say those feelings, don't elaborate on them. Just say, hey, I felt belittled. I feel belittled and disrespected. That's it. Everyone can relate to the feelings of being belittled and disrespected. Now, your need is critical because your need is like a higher level need that you've got, that you believe the world should work like this. In a work environment, the work environment should work this way, and that everybody can agree to that. And so your need is, you know what, hey, my need is that I work in a work environment where I feel like when I'm speaking that I'm being respected and that I'm at least being heard. And now that's critical. If you put that out there, John can probably agree to that. The last part is request. Now, what is a request that you can make to John so then he can start to take action that ultimately it can formulate change? Now, you don't want to make it something that's concrete. You don't want to say, hey, my request is that you never interrupt me again. Unrealistic. Probably not going to happen. John may interrupt you sometime in the future, especially if he's weaning off this because it was a habit. But if your request is, hey, My request is that when I'm speaking, that you're conscious of what I'm saying and that you try your best to refrain from interrupting me when I'm speaking. That's a very fair and valid request. John can probably agree to that because you're not asking for too much. You're just asking for him to be conscious of it. So that is how observation, feeling, need request works. It ultimately just lays out exactly what the thing that happened was, how you felt about it, without calling out John or calling out the other person or talking about how bad of a person they were. Sharing what your need is and your request for how they can implement that for the future. That is critical. Now, we're going to talk a lot about this later on tonight in this workshop with our guest speaker. Our guest speaker is an expert on conflict management in the workplace. I think you're going to really enjoy what our guest has to say. But those are my personal observations about what I've observed to work in observation in terms of conflict management. The last thing that I want to share before we jump into our guest speaker is this importance of teaching somebody else something that you've learned. One of the things that I've observed is that when people go through this workshop, when people go through this program, 20 is the magic number. If you tell 20 or more people about something you learned in this program, by the way, it doesn't necessarily need to be that you taught them a full seminar. It could be that you mentioned to your significant other or a friend, a peer, a colleague, hey, I learned about this thing called observation, feeling, need, request in Ambition and Motion workshop. That could be it. We know that when people tell 20 or more people about something they learned, anything they learned in this program, their likelihood of achieving their professional goals increases exponentially. And the reason why is because teaching something to somebody else reinforces that information in their mind. And so by doing that, by telling 20 or more people, the likelihood that this is going to stick, the likelihood that you are going to apply it in your professional environment, the likelihood that you're going to achieve the professional goals that you've set for yourself, because that's been such a big focus of this program, increases exponentially. So what I would love for you to do after this workshop is to find somebody that you can teach something that you learned from this workshop this evening. I think that will really help reinforce what you're learning in this program, really help you make the most out of this experience. I'm so excited to dive into our guest speaker this evening. I really hope that, and I really encourage you to participate in the program. You're going to get a new mentor. We're going to have new content. We're going to have new speakers. I think you're really going to enjoy it. This has been a pleasure working with you all, and I look forward to the next steps. Hey everybody, welcome to our workshop this evening. I'm so excited to dive into our topic of how to manage conflict at work. And this is an interesting topic because, you know, if you're a young professional or if you're a student, you might be thinking like, okay, like what does conflict at work even look like? How does this even come up? Just like in any scenario, conflict can exist, whether that mean beef with a coworker, beef with a fellow student, beef with a colleague. This happens all the time, whether it be passive aggressive texts or emails, or just people feeling like somebody else slighted somebody else or prioritize some work over another work. Conflict happens at work. It's bound to happen. Whenever you bring humans into any group setting anywhere, conflict is surely to arise unless people are able to talk and communicate through it. So fortunately for us today, we've got an incredible guest speaker. We got an incredible guest with us who's been in the professional space for quite a while. She's got great insight into, you know, managing conflict, handling challenges at work, just handling changes at work in general, and how to effectively run through that. We've got Lisa Pereira McClintock. She's developed extensive experience in marketing, communications, and business development within the architecture, engineering, and construction industries, and is currently the business development director at Unico Engineering. Lisa, thanks for being here.
Thank you. This is great. Thanks for having me.
So let's get started. I know I gave like a brief introduction of you, but if you could maybe share with us and the audience a little bit more about you and your work and kind of how you got into this type of work.
Oh, goodness. I got into it probably by happenstance. My degrees are in communication studies, and after college, I did some marketing, managed a small nonprofit, then started doing public outreach for engineers on transportation projects. From there, I was hired by an engineering firm. And my most recent, my current job, I joined a startup intentionally to help it grow. And over the last 8 years, we've grown from, I was employee number 8 to now we're about 75 in 8 years with great opportunities for growth.
That's amazing. That's super cool. So
I would imagine that as you grew a startup from 8 people to 75, there are a lot of growing pains. Especially when we're talking about how to manage conflict at work. I would imagine that as you went through that process, there might have been some people that were really well equipped for a startup environment, but maybe weren't as equipped for maybe a medium-sized business environment. Or there were people that were equipped for a big, large corporate environment and maybe not as equipped for a startup environment. So what was that like? How was handling the people changes as the company grew? How we're handling those growing pains?
That's a great question, and it's not just in the startup, it's in the other firms as well. So first, I would say conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, if everybody was always on the same page, it could end up in being in groupthink, and no good ideas would resolve from that. So I think the difference, what is important is making sure that the conflict is not around core values or ethics or those types of things. If the conflict is around how to go about implementing something or what market do you want to go after, and people have disagreements over those things, you hash them out, and then that's where you get some of your most creative and productive ideas, right? But if you're at a firm, and certainly, I've experienced this in my past, where you had a difference of opinion about the direction, overall direction, or management style, or leadership, or business ethics, then perhaps that's not a good fit for you and you make a different decision.
Yeah. Ooh, I like that. I like how you distinguish that. I think there's a book called The Five Dysfunctions of the Team, of a Team. And one of the key components of the book is this idea of healthy conflict. Essentially, the fact that we can have respectful disagreements within a workplace and environment. And in fact, to your point, if we don't have that healthy conflict, if we don't have those disagreements, we are unlikely to grow, because we know discomfort breeds growth. So I guess maybe I love to learn stories and situations, scenarios where you had teams where you were talking about where that group think was happening, that thing you were talking about of everybody being on the same page. How did you end up determining this was bad? Like, we're not going in the right direction?
Oh gosh, I don't think I have an example of that, but I have an example of the opposite, where you have conflict and you hash it out. So, whether it's at an annual strategic planning meeting or a leadership meeting, you have those discussions. You, in fact, have debate almost, right? But at the end of the day, you agree, whatever is the result, that everybody needs to leave that meeting rowing the boat in the same direction, right? You need to give that unified front externally, but internally you hash it out. Really early on in my career, I was in my mid-20s. I was the executive director of a small nonprofit, and I had a board of directors. And one of them was an older engineer from one of the firms that was part of this nonprofit. And I learned really early on, he made me very uncomfortable, and I'm really young and trying to figure this out, probably not much different than many of the people that will be watching this, right? Trying to take that big first real professional job and do your best. And every board meeting he would debate with me. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, he doesn't like me, or oh my gosh, I'm not good enough, or my ideas aren't good enough. And finally he told me, he goes, Lisa, it's my job to make sure that we have this debate so that we get to the best solution. It's not necessarily my opinion, but I'm playing devil's advocate so that everybody in the group has a good discussion and we come out with the right ultimate goal. So I think that's something I've taken with me and learned early on, that discussion is important. And just because somebody does it differently or has a different opinion doesn't mean that it's wrong.
I love that. I love that you shared that story, because that's a great kind of foray into how conflict at work happens and how do we manage that. Because I could easily see how if this manager of yours did not come to you to say, hey, I'm debating you not because I hate you and I'm this big jerk that wants to ruin all of your ideas. I'm debating you because I want to come up with the best decision possible. And for this manager to explain that to you, I would imagine was really critical to your own learning and understanding and development, because I could easily see that if this had occurred over and over and over again, it could be very easy for you to go up to a coworker and say, John Doe is a total jerk. He sabotages all of my ideas in every single one of our meetings. He hates me, and he's got it out for me. And I could easily see how, if you have that mentality and you share it with other people, now gossip spreads. Now other people are like, wow, John Doe must be a really big jerk. Like, what's going on here? And that's where negativity comes from. All of a sudden, John Doe hears it backhanded from somebody else that, you've got a vendetta against him. And then you've got real beef, tangible, cut it with a knife beef that ultimately was solved by just one person communicating to the other person.
Exactly. And in fact, I have to catch myself now, having learned that. I know that the outcomes can be good, but if I am constantly the one playing devil's advocate in a discussion without putting it in context, the reverse can happen, right? They think that I'm the jerk instead of trying to get to a better outcome. So it was a little uncomfortable at first until that conversation happened. And then after that, it's like, okay, I see where we're going with this, and it makes sense. So yeah.
I think there might be a lot of people that are watching this that are maybe thinking to themselves like, okay, I'm in a scenario like that where I have a really jerk manager or boss or coworker, colleague that sabotages my ideas, and I'm frustrated and I don't know what else to do. What do you suggest that person do? If you go back to yourself when you were in that scenario, what if your boss didn't come to you and say, hey, I'm challenging you because I want to come up with the best ideas possible. If he didn't come to do that, what would you suggest a more junior person do in that scenario to clear the air without creating beef?
Well, I think there's two things to do. I mean, one is you should develop this network of peers that don't necessarily work in the same company, but are your level, maybe at other companies, that are your go-to people as sounding boards, right? To talk it through. Maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe you overreacted. Maybe it's nothing. But more importantly, maybe it is something. And if it is something, then I think that everybody should be comfortable saying, hey, Joe Smith, can I have 5 minutes of your time? I want to talk this through. I feel as if, everything I come up with is not sitting well with you, or you seem to think that I'm totally going in the wrong direction. Can you give me some input or some context in how can I do things better or communicate it better? As we all know, communication is probably 90% of the problems in life in general and at work too. And if you're not willing to have that conversation, then you're part of the problem, right? You're not willing to clear it up on your end. So I don't think you should ever be afraid to do that. If you do it and it's not received, then maybe that goes back to the first thing I said is maybe you're not in the right place if you're that far apart in your approach and your ideas.
You know what I really loved about that, of what you just said, was the olive branch notion of giving them the benefit of the doubt, saying, hey, you know what, I'm probably doing something wrong here. Mm-hmm. I would love to know, what can I do to be better? As opposed to coming and saying, hey, you have denied or challenged every one of the ideas that I've come up with. What's your deal? What's your problem? That insinuates blame on the other person. They've got a problem with you and that you are inculpable. By you accepting the blame, the culpability for potentially doing something wrong that you are unaware of, you are much more likely to extend that you're much more likely to essentially receive honey than vinegar, I guess, to follow that catching bee metaphor.
Sure. I mean, the truth is, in communication, each party has responsibility, right? So maybe you feel like you've communicated perfectly or presented your ideas perfectly, but if they're not received in the same way that you provided them, then, there's some ownership to have there, and everybody should take ownership. And if you approach the situation in that regard, then you can learn from it and figure out what's a better way to communicate, or you can understand that maybe there was no issue at all. Maybe they're playing devil's advocate, or, maybe it's whatever, but you're giving that opportunity in a non-threatening way, right? To have that conversation.
Well, it's just this idea of radical accountability. Like, if something at work happens in the way that you, or really anything in that, for that matter, in life, anything that happens that is not the desired outcome that you would like, but you had a hand in this outcome happening or wanting it to happen, at the end of the day, it's your fault. Like, there's no blame to be doled out for anybody else. It is your fault because you could have done something better. You could have communicated clearer. You could have set better expectations. You could have done preparatory work. There's an infinite number of things that you could have done to help you achieve the success that you wanted to have achieved in that scenario. And because you didn't hit it, it doesn't serve you to blame other people, because it just creates frustration and angst. In reality, if you could turn around and blame yourself, you are much more likely to come up with a real result from that scenario.
I would agree. I wouldn't consider it blame. I would take it as taking accountability or responsibility for whatever the outcome may be. Blame seems like a tough word for me. From my perspective, blame's negative. Taking accountability, in my opinion, is positive. So when there is a mistake made, if it's my responsibility or one of my team members' responsibility, I, of course, need to take ownership of that. Likewise, if there's an opportunity to give praise, you need to give that and not take it yourself. I mean, to me, that balance is the signs of a good leader, right? You take ownership when something doesn't go right, or part of it, whatever piece that is, and you don't take 100% ownership for sure when something goes correctly, because you need to share that with your team.
So yeah, Lisa, I loved what you said about just this idea of doling out credibility and taking on accountability for your own mistakes, because ultimately we know that if you do that, you are going to create a level of psychological safety with your team and with those that you work with, and people are going to feel much more comfortable with working with you, because they're going to know, dang, this person's a great person because they gave me credit, they allowed me to shine even when I wasn't necessarily given the credit in the first place.
I completely agree. And to take ownership of a piece of it or whatever, it's an opportunity to learn and grow, right? Even if you're part of the team and Joe Smith was part of this and they took ownership for that piece of it, you might think, oh, maybe I didn't provide the right direction when we met as a team, or we doled out the responsibilities, even though they took responsibility for their piece. Whenever you work in a group, it's team dynamics and interaction and setting the stage and all of that. And we can all learn when things go well, and we can all learn when things don't quite go so well, to figure out what to do differently next time, right?
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming at it from this very mature kind of like high level view, like we prepared answers to these questions. But what if I'm in a scenario where I know I've got conflict and I don't necessarily know what the solution is? Let's say I've got conflict and I am so 1,000,000% confident this person has got it out for me. They want to sabotage everything I do. How do you kind of do a self-awareness audit of like, okay, step back, take a deep breath? Do you go to people to talk to? Do you what do you do to kind of do that check-in moment with yourself to really reevaluate, is this person trying to sabotage me?
Well, that's a great question. We all have those days. And am I having a bad day, or is this like real, right? So that's where I go back to make sure you have a group of peers that are, in my opinion, you can have a confidant within the company, but it's also super important, I think, to have some people outside of the company that can be your sounding board, because they're totally neutral. Go have a glass of wine or coffee or something and say, hey, can I talk this scenario through with you? And get some neutral advice, right? Because they provide different perspective, fresh perspective. And especially if there's an ongoing challenge, or you just have a personality conflict with somebody, is the hair on the back of your neck already up before a conversation even starts, and you're just like, this ain't going to go in the right direction? Are you giving it proper thought through, or is there really an issue? And if there is an issue, then you can just maybe take the emotion out by having the sounding board and figure out what really is the root cause, and then you can have that conversation, right? Because if you go into any conversation charged up or emotional about it, it's probably not going to end up well.
Ooh, could you share with me an example of a time that you did bad just conflict management? When you like in hindsight look and you're like, yep, I didn't handle that one right. Yeah. But in the moment you were really frustrated and ticked off.
So there's a recent example, not my shining moment for sure. But we had a group of maybe 4 people plus myself in a conference room. We were doing a review of a proposal. I was incredibly frustrated because people hadn't met their deadlines, and their response was, one of the responses was, "It's not a big deal. You always make it work, Lisa. We always blow through our deadlines and you always make it work." And I lost it, and wasn't, yelled and wasn't so nice. And it wasn't my shining moment. And, what I took away from that, I went, a day or 2 later, went and talked to my boss, the owner of the company. I said, "Look, that was not my shining moment, but I'm really frustrated with this and this," and kind of talked through how to come back and discuss it differently. And then for the one person in the room that had met their deadlines, I went and had a sidebar and I said, "Look, I was really frustrated. I'm tired of this. I don't think those are the right answers." And, she totally said, "I would have been frustrated if I was you too." The end result is the outcome ended up being better. I guess I just, had been too accommodating perhaps, and not paused and set the tone differently with a different kind of discussion. But, at some point we all get to the end of our rope and maybe we blow up, and that was my moment, but I owned it. I took responsibility for it. I talked to my boss about it. What can we do differently? We came up with a plan. And then, moving forward, it was a different scenario. There were things that I could do to set the stage differently, setting up better, more detailed timelines of when things were due, and some other things. So there was no question about deadlines or timeframes or any of that. And to communicate what else is on my plate, because from their perspective, that was the only thing that was going on. So why couldn't they blow through their deadline? Because I would get rid of, take care of it, not knowing I had 16 other competing deadlines. So.
Yeah, I think that is more relatable than most circumstances. I just quick question to everybody in the audience right now. Who of you have had conflict with other people at work because you felt like you were getting not necessarily taken advantage of, but you were too accommodating to somebody else, and you didn't clearly communicate what the real expectations were for the work itself? Because I think, Lisa, to your point, you were really accommodating to the past, and people just took that as carte blanche, like, "Oh, this is just standard operating procedure. Like, I've got a deadline, but like, deadline, Lisa's going to pick me up anyways." And it kind of almost sounds like, I know this is like a parent-child kind of relationship, but it's like that, parent who is like, "Hey, child, you need to clean up your room." And then the parent ends up cleaning up the room anyways. And then the kid's just like, "I'm not going to clean up my room. I know you're going to clean it up for me anyway. So like, what's the big deal?" But that's, clarifying those expectations is probably really critical to make sure that your boundaries are respected, and even future people who are in similar roles as you within that organization are responded as well, because you set the tone at the top. And I think that makes that's a really interesting example, because I would imagine that if like you were accommodating for, let's say, the project managers that are working on some project that you're working on, anybody that's underneath you in your department is going to follow your suit, because that's the standard that has been set.
Absolutely. In fact, we just hired a senior level marketing manager that's working underneath me. And that was one of the things we talked about up front, is like, we need real specific deadlines. These people haven't been exposed to this all that often, and they don't always recognize what else is on your plate. So we need to make sure that we communicate that up front when we, have a proposal kickoff meeting or a project kickoff meeting. The expectation, who's responsible for what, when is it due? What does that entail? And, part of that, it was growing pains of a small company, right? When we were smaller and it was myself and the owner doing most of these things together, we have such a great working relationship that we didn't need to be that structured. But when you get other people involved that have different personalities and different responsibilities and maybe less experience doing the task at hand, they may need a little bit more guidance and structure. And it never hurts to set those expectations up front. Nobody's ever going to come away from a meeting and, "Oh my God, we didn't need a calendar. She didn't need to tell me when this stuff was due." Nobody's going to say that. But if you don't, they may not remember when those things are due. So, it's okay to have that planning up front.
So let's say we've done the planning process. Let's say there was some part of our work that we were frustrated at. We had communication, we set the ground rules of what our expectations are, and then, we blow it. Like we say, hey, when we submit our work, we must submit it on the timeline that we submitted. I know I've been guilty of this where we say, hey, I've said this before where I said, hey, we set a time to have a meeting. We show up on time for that meeting. And then like almost invariably the very next meeting or the meeting after that, I am running behind. And I realize that I am not abiding by the own rule that I made a stance to set. How do you handle that? How do you handle it when you're like, oh my goodness, I work so freaking hard to set this expectation, and then I'm not even accountable of it on my own time when it gets my chance to actually showcase that I can do that? How do you handle that sort of scenario?
First of all, I wouldn't recommend doing that on the first meeting after you set the expectation. Make sure you do it right, at least for a couple of times. But, you know, just like everything, life happens and schedules change, and, you know, providing consistent, reliable information up front. So, you know, it would be better before the meeting happened to send out a note or an email and say, I am so sorry, but 3 deadlines got pushed up and now I need to do this first. Can we reschedule? Or to go in the meeting if you're running 15 minutes late, you know, be honest about it. It's okay to, we're not perfect. Nobody is perfect, right? But to own it or take responsibility or to explain is always a good thing. Now, if every meeting you show up 15 minutes late and you're saying, oh my gosh, I got stuck in traffic, or oh my gosh, get a new watch, you know, or set your clock back 15 minutes, because that's not going to fly. If it's, you know, if it's the exception and not the rule, I think everybody understands that, right?
Yeah.
But you need to show up and be on it, you know, 90% of the time or 95% of the time. And then it's okay. Life happens the other 5%, as long as you have a plan to make up for the lost time, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that makes a lot of sense. It's just kind of going back to that accountability thing and just being open up front and just the communication part. Another kind of tangentially related point within this whole kind of foray is, and this is an interesting topic, but it's the topic of unconscious bias in the workplace. And it's a topic I love to broach with you because I know as a white man, there are things that I don't think about in the workplace that a woman, a person of color might be thinking about that I just like, I'd never even thought about it, never even thought twice about it. And I think that can be a massive cause of workplace conflict, because there could be some people in the office that just do things and don't even consider the ramifications for said actions, because it just never even occurred to them that a negative repercussion could happen from taking said action, while other people are like very keenly aware of the negative potential repercussions for certain actions. Have you ever had a scenario where you've observed just, you know, blatant unconscious bias happening within a workplace? And if so, like, how do you communicate? How do you work through those types of things?
So that's an interesting question. I mean, the last 20 plus years more, I've been part of leadership teams at the last companies. And so I kind of take that from a different perspective to make sure that if I think that maybe things aren't being looked at from the perspective of a woman or a young person or a person of color, whatever, that's taken into account. My current firm approach is we hire talent. It doesn't matter if you're a male or a female or young or old or white or black or Asian or whatever. We hire talent. And because of that, just naturally, we have a very diverse firm, right? But I do think that there are some instances, especially when it comes to business development, where there are some unintentional biases. For instance, over a year ago, we were planning to take clients on a fishing trip, and I'm working with two of the senior people, both men, planning this trip. They wanted to take clients, and they're going, well, I'll take so-and-so and so-and-so, and I'll take so-and-so, and we'll have Carlos take these people. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, what about Lacey and Talina? And they kind of looked at me, just assuming that they perhaps wouldn't want to go on a fishing trip. Because I said right up front that I'm out. I don't want, that's not my thing. I don't want to go. And they looked at me and I'm like, look, we have to at least ask. They're in the same position as these guys. And they asked and they immediately said yes, and they brought clients. So it wasn't intentional by any means, but I do think sometimes it's important to bring those things up in a non-confrontational way. Did you think about it? Let's be fair. There are things in business that happen all the time. There's golf tournaments and some people golf and some people don't. So maybe the one that likes to golf all the time is the one that gets asked. And then suddenly other people in the firm are going, well, wait a minute, how come they always get to spend time with the boss because the boss is golfing, or, you know, a baseball game, or whatever the case may be. They're not always biases about male or female or ethnicity. Sometimes it's just a click, right? And they go to the person that likes to do it, to do the same activity, or this person's really good at that, so I always ask them to do that rather than take time to teach somebody else to do that. I think that if we don't put people in those boxes and just take a step back and look at the talent or the potential talent or the activities, then we're not treating people different. That everybody is given that equal opportunity. When we start putting people in the boxes and like, oh, they don't golf, or they don't do this, or, you know, then those things happen. And I think sometimes it's unintentional and unfortunate.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great response. I think that makes a lot of sense, Lisa. What if I'm somebody that has an issue with a manager? What if I'm somebody that has an issue with my own manager? I feel like they potentially slighted me in some way or overlooked me for an opportunity, or maybe I just feel like in general, they say comments or things to me or around me that just kind of rub me the wrong way. And I've not really known how to bring it up to this manager because they are my boss. But at the same time, I know that they make me uncomfortable, but I don't necessarily know how to broach that subject. What do you suggest that maybe a more junior person do to broach a scenario where, yeah, they've got a manager that says potentially inappropriate things at the workplace that this person maybe doesn't think is inappropriate, but to them it's not workplace appropriate?
Well, certainly every employer is sensitive to these issues right now, whether or not not just right now, just sensitive to these issues. I mean, we all have to take harassment training. We all have to learn about these things. Not everybody takes it seriously. And sometimes you get in that comfort level where you think the joking is okay, and some new employee comes on board, and that relationship that you've built and the joking that you've been able to do, or the casual discussions that you have, may not be the same, right? So if you're that person and you're uncomfortable about it, I would do a couple of things. One, that's what HR is for. It doesn't mean that you're complaining or that you're filing a complaint, but they're kind of that neutral body within a firm to talk to about those things. Secondly, if there is somebody else, and I, of a manager that I don't know that I would necessarily go to a coworker on this. You don't want to create an opportunity where gossip starts, right? Because then somebody says, oh, so-and-so said this, and it made them uncomfortable. I mean, let's not create a mountain out of a potential molehill, right? But you should identify those people that you work with that you can have those conversations with. And if it isn't another manager, it's HR. I mean, HR is going to be confidential. Look at there's probably a process in your employee handbook that outlines what to do in these situations, and definitely follow through. If it's the first time and it's a little bit awkward or uncomfortable, it's okay to say, that comment makes me a little uncomfortable, and nip it in the bud right there, right? Just let them know that whatever they said is makes you a little uncomfortable, because again, they may not think that anything of it, and would be horrified if they thought they were offending somebody or something like that. So back to communication, right? If you don't know there's a problem, how do you fix it?
Yeah, no, that's great. I'd love to learn your thoughts. I'm a big fan of Dr. Marshall Rosenberg's Keys to Nonviolent Communication. And I know it's a strange name for this, but he talks about this idea of observation, feeling, need, request. And I found that to be particularly effective for having a one-on-one about that topic with anybody about anything. So if it's somebody saying something inappropriate at work and you feel like that was inappropriate, you can say, hey, observation to XYZ manager, John Doe manager. You said this yesterday. and my feeling is a little disrespected and perhaps uncomfortable. And my need is a workplace where I can feel like I can be comfortable and respected at work, and more or less not receive comments that make me uncomfortable. And my request is that you don't say things like this again. What are your thoughts on just that note, that kind of like that kind of conversation prompt of observation, feeling, need, request?
I'm not familiar with that book or that concept other than what you just said. I think there's a fine line for coming across as a high maintenance employee if it gets too much in the weeds, and maybe it's depending on the situation, right? If it's already escalated, I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure. To be honest, Garrett, I am not sure about that. I think it would be better to say, you know what, that comment made me a little uncomfortable. I just want you to know that and why. But to then say the request, I need you to do this for me, and I'm a junior employee and this is a manager. Depending on how it's communicated, I think it could be taken wrong.
Sure. So maybe, I guess the request isn't, I need you to do this. My request is that you don't make comments like that.
Or I would instead of a request, I would appreciate it if in the future. I think that sounds a little better. I get why they do the observation request, but if it's a new employee, it's a junior employee, if there isn't a relationship already built up, I'm not sure that's how I would approach it. I think I would say that comment made me feel uncomfortable. I would appreciate it if in the future, that joking or that kind of comment isn't said, or perhaps you can choose your words differently
Sure.
to get the point across. But part of that is the culture of the company, right? If they empower all employees, even at a junior level, to request, I just don't know that it would go over everywhere to have.
Yeah, I definitely think it's definitely on a culture by culture basis. I know with our team, it's been particularly effective just because, and it's not necessarily for things like in that nature. It could be just like, whether it be showing up late to a meeting or somebody interrupting somebody else or just doing anything that frustrates somebody else, that they at least have a conversation about it. And it's a kind of an interesting format for just bringing that up in a respectable manner than just like blurting out at somebody.
Sure. And I can see that if somebody's always late, I need you to be on time, I think is inappropriate. I need you to be on time to respect the rest of us at the tables time too. We were all here on time. That's different than I need you to say something differently. I don't know. Sure. If it's more one-on-one, that's in a group situation. So it's all situational, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I'd be curious. I'd love to ask the audience a question real quick. How have you handled workplace conflict in the past? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about it. And Lisa, this has been really interesting. This has been a fun discussion. I feel like this is a very relevant conversation for young professionals that are entering into the space, into their field of just trying to figure out exactly just the gaps and the things that are going on at work. I guess one other question that I'm fascinated to know is that as we get more virtual, a lot of our communications are becoming via video, where we might not be able to be with the people we're chatting with, or text or phone. How do you handle scenarios where there might be a lost in translation moment, where somebody said something or their body language on camera is saying something that is not meant to be communicated in the way that it's been communicated?
Yeah, that's a good one. First of all, if you think there's an awkward communication or a confrontational communication, type your response and set it aside and then read it again, because tone is not usually in the text or an email, and text is shorter than an email. But, I encourage you to pick up the dang phone and talk to somebody. Better yet, meet in person. My advice to young people that are thinking that this is awesome and I can work in a virtual world and live wherever I want and work wherever I want, you may be able to. It may work out that way. But I would advise you that if you don't need to show up or be on site or be connected, at least some of the time, just remember that you're not going to be there for part of the decisions. You're not going to be there for the discussion over the water cooler. Out of sight, out of mind. And if you can do this only from the computer, then somebody in another country or a cheaper place or whatever could also do the same job. So make sure that communication is so important. That connectivity is so important to be able to grow and get mentored and know what's going on. Make sure you find that balance if you're choosing not to be in person. I can tell you our office is in person. We all have the flexibility to work from home when we need to. But in particular for young people joining the company and bringing them on board, they have expressed in great detail, especially their engineers, that if I didn't have that senior person to turn to and look at the plans and talk to them about that, or go in the field in the construction project, it would be very challenging. So I would find another way, is I guess my long answer short, find another way to communicate and at least be on the phone or in person if you can. And remember that video is great. I mean, that's awesome. But people sometimes are doing multitasking and doing other things, and they look disinterested, or they're scratching their nose or whatever, that can be construed the wrong way. So when you're on a video, you need to make sure you're on the video and present. And that's, I think, harder to do than when you're in person. When you're in person, you know you're sitting across the table from somebody, so you're on. I think we get lax, and you know, I have a teenage daughter, and I can tell you that school from home, they never had to turn on their cameras. We've had interviews that have for projects that have been remote, and the panel hasn't turned on cameras, and there's no way to connect or understand if they're getting your message or getting that verbal feedback. Just remember that when you're on the other side.
That's a really good point. I love that, Lisa. So I'd love to ask the audience one more question. In terms of your experience with just virtual communications, how have you handled potentially those lost in translation moments? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about it. Lisa, this has been a great workshop. This has been a really fun conversation. I feel like we've covered some really cool points and really cool topics just around the idea of managing and handling conflict in the workplace. Are there any final tips that you would suggest our audience just kind of think about if they ever have conflict or anything that they're going through in a workplace environment?
Yeah, I think that the tips are to pause and think about what was said. Don't always, you know, the context can change the same words dramatically, right? And how you respond to them with emotion or non-emotion can change things. Find that peer group. That's what I'm going to say. Find your peers and let them be your group. I mean, I've had 2 colleagues that work for different firms that, you know, we get together and talk once or twice a month or once a quarter, depending on how busy we were. And it was, even though they did the same thing at competing firms, it was never about trade secrets. It was, have you ever done this kind of thing before? Or what would you do in this type of situation? And that is, that network, those people are so invaluable for you in your job now, but also going in and getting career advice if you're ready to make a move, or life advice. You know, you need those people. So make them, and you probably have met them already. They're probably classmates of yours, right? And your careers are going to grow at the same time, so you're going to experience similar things. So definitely keep that group together.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for being here. Everybody in our audience, thank you all for being here. Final question, Lisa, how can our audience connect with you, learn more about your work? Are you okay with them connecting with you on LinkedIn?
Sure.
Cool.
LinkedIn, my email is lisa@unicoengineering.com. You can send me an email. I'll stay up front depending on how many emails I got. I can't promise immediate response, but I will do my best. And yeah, this has been fun. Thank you for including me.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Lisa. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, everybody. Lisa, thanks for being here. Good night, everybody.